Hello everyone, welcome back to the Blockman editor tutorial. In these videos, we will give you a complete introduction to the Blockman editor. In this video, we will learn about the contents related to the block trigger. Alright, let's get started. Go to the editor and create a voxel grassland project. Select the blocks in the game components view. Place a block of any template in the scene. Click on the template setting in the properties view on the right to enter the list of properties for this block template. Click Trigger Edit to enter the Trigger Edit interface. By clicking the Add Trigger button in the upper left corner, we can see the trigger node for that block template. The trigger nodes of the block are, when the block is clicked, when the block is touched, when the block is stepped on, when leaving the top side of the block, when the block is destroyed, when entering the block, when leaving from the interior of the block, when an entity launches a missile and the missile hits the block. Next, we will introduce you to the more frequently used trigger nodes. As for other trigger nodes, you can try them out for yourself. When the block is stepped on node is triggered when an entity steps on the top side of a block. If the entity keeps walking or sprinting on the block, it will keep triggering the trigger. When leaving the top side of the block node is triggered when the player steps on the block and leaves the top side of the block. If the entity keeps walking or sprinting on the block, it will also keep triggering this trigger multiple times. When the block is destroyed, node triggers when the player destroys the block. Note that the block needs the block interaction. Block can be destroyed, option checked. When entering the block, node is triggered when a player entity enters the interior of the block. The blocks in this trigger node are usually blocks with no collision properties. It is important to note that all blocks created by the same block template will execute the trigger logic from that block template. Next, let's work through an example together with the block trigger. The example's goals are the following. When the players step on the emerald or block, they will be teleported to a certain place. When the players leave the top side of the redstone or block, they will take damage. When the players break the magenta glass block, they will get a speed boost buff. When the players enter the water block, they will die immediately. First, we click on the emerald or block and edit its trigger. Click the Add button in the upper left corner and select the trigger node when the block is stepped on. Double-click on the execution port to open the action nodes list. Find entity in the list, and select Move the player to the specified region. In the region parameter, you can either fill in the coordinates of the teleportation point, or click on the coordinates icon to select the area of the teleportation point directly in the map. Then double-click on the player and click on the entity that steps on the block in the current trigger parameter. This completes the trigger logic that when the player steps on the emerald or block, they will be teleported to a certain location. Next, let's edit the trigger for the redstone or block. Click the Add button in the upper left corner to add the trigger node when leaving the top side of the block to it. Click on Entity in the Action Node list and select Damage Entity. Double-click on the Action Node list in the Entity parameter, and click on the entity leaving the top side of the block in the current trigger parameter. Fill in the damage parameter with 10. This completes the trigger logic that the player will take damage when they leave the top side of the redstone or block. Next, let's edit the trigger for the magenta glass block. Click on the magenta glass block, and first add the when the block is destroyed trigger node from the trigger edit. Click on Entity in the Action Node list, and select Add buff to the entity. Drag the Action Node list in the Entity parameter, and click on the entity that destroys a block in the current trigger parameter. In the buff setting, select the pre-made buff, and uncheck Limit Duration of the buff option. This completes the trigger logic that when the players breaks the magenta glass block, they will receive a speed buff. Finally, let's write the trigger logic for the water block. We can add a when entering the block trigger node to the water block via the Add button in the upper left corner. Click on Entity in the Action Node list, and select Kill Entity. Double-click on the execution port of the entity parameter, and click on the entity that has entered the block in the current trigger parameter. The trigger logic that when players enter the water block, they will die immediately is now completed. Now let's run the game and see the results. That's all for this video. We hope it can help you on your way to a great creator. If you want to know more about the editor, you can comment below the video or post on the official forum. See you in the next video.